fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
All right, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, and joining me, we've got two co-hosts today. They're both horrific. So, ladies first, we've got Jennifer Ann Gordon.
Hi. I just got so excited. I was just called a lady, and I've been down the rabbit hole today looking at all of that, like, where is Kate Middleton thing. So the second you said lady, I thought I had been, like, given a title in England for a moment.
Well, yeah,
like,
we got to have someone to replace her.
Yeah, I guess that'll be me.
You're far more elegant, anyway.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
Well, today I'm shoveling it, so. Now, speaking of a good shovel, McAuley is co-hosting today as well.
That is correct.
You know, and yeah, he's 61, remember, everyone.
That is correct, and because of my background doing the Ripper research, I am excited to talk to Chris about this stuff.
Yeah, it'll be good. Lots of murder here. And of course, joining us is a returning guest, and he's got a new book coming out called Shadows by Gaslight, and it's Chris McAuley. So thank you for being here, Chris.
Well, thanks for having me on, folks, once again. It's a great pleasure.
It's delicious. Wow. So you know, your writing process, how many do you do a year? How much writing? You must write all the time. You know what I'm saying? Like, it seems like you're with comic books, then your books, and with Dacker, and you've got all these things going on. It must be crazy.
Kind of do. It's I see it as a job. So, you know, I've got a day job. Shout out to the guys at Sony PlayStation. I work for them. That's my day job. I'm actually I work on video games and stuff as a day job. But I also see my writing as a job as well. And I feel like I have a responsibility to it. So I'll get up in the morning, maybe about 2 or 3 in the morning, and just start. I'll do 3 hours a day. I'll do it 3 or 4 hours a day.
At 2
or 3 in the morning?
Yeah. I get up very early. Yeah, I get up really early. Usually my cat wakes me up.
That's nighttime. I'm going to sleep at that time.
Yeah, my process is very sort of, I get up at 2 and 3 in the morning, or 3 in the morning, I grab a coffee, I come downstairs. I've got little boards around me that tell me when deadlines are coming up, or, you know, the magazines that I want to write for, or, you know, now with novels, you know, if I've got any work, like for Doctor Who or Star Trek or anything like that, that's all coming up. So I've got like 4 boards actually around me, like almost to-do lists. And then I will, I mean, this is getting a little esoteric, but I do go into like, I listen to positive affirmations in the morning, because I think it's good to start the day feeling relatively good about yourself, you know, and then I just start, you know, whether it's maybe an hour of research or if it's just, knuckling down and starting to write, the first draft or whatever. I just do it. I just sit down and do it. And I do feel, a responsibility to writing because it gives me so much joy, and it, you know, that's one of the great gifts of my life.
When do you go to bed?
That was going to be my question.
Yeah, roughly about 7 or 8 o'clock at night.
Oh, okay. I'm a midnight person.
I used to be, and then I find that having quite a good structure of writing before I go to my day job, and then doing the day job, then getting something to eat, or maybe going out for a pint or something with my wife, and then coming home and going to bed. It works quite well. It's just that structure, you know.
Mystified.
Yeah, and just your structure. Do you take that structure into your books, like your lifestyle, the way it works, the way you've got to be timed and all that?
Sometimes with these, because this novel we're talking about at the minute, this book we're talking about at the minute, it's the first time that I've written anything that's factual. So this was. I had to, you know, structure out the chapters and really sit down and think about what I wanted to put into this book thematically. in a way that I wouldn't do with a comic book or an audio drama or a TV show or whatever. With the fictional aspects of my writing, I just kind of go with it. I put everything in. And, thank God for good editors, but I put everything in and just go for it. But with these type of books, I feel that I have to have a far more structured approach, even to, the research. This book, there was about 3 months of research in it. And this book really came from, me wanting to break down. I mean, when I write the Dracula stuff or I'm writing Victorian horror stuff, it's very much, almost fanciful. In some ways when you're writing Dracula and you're injecting some of the sort of the period costumes and all of that, there's a form of grandeur to it. Whereas with this book, there's not a lot of grandeur, but there's a lot of reality. And I felt called to write this book because of the Dracula work. Because I was presenting Victoriana in a fictional sense, I also wanted to, represent it in a factual sense as well. So, there was a lot of research with it, and I felt that I wanted to bring people to the mirror and show them through the glass darkly at an era which is still very much in the forefront of people's thoughts.
When did your fascination with Victoriana, the Victorian era, and dark horror and fiction, when did that start for you? Was it when you were a kid?
Yeah, I have to say, I've said this a couple of times, I don't really see myself as a horror writer. I've written in the genre, but what's fascinating me is, people fascinate me, the facets of individuals. So my introduction to Victoriana came at school. So when I was in primary 7, which was about 7 years of age, 8 years of age, we did a module on Victorian Britain. And I was just fascinated by that, because it seemed so far away, but yet it wasn't. And then I took an interest in reading Sherlock Holmes. Now, the Dracula thing actually came from the school library. And I picked up a copy of Dracula and read that, which kind of fueled the horror and the Victorian, the interest in Victorian history. But I find the macabre or, the horrific to be particularly captivating in a historical setting.
Along the Victorian side, that's what I do research on, the Jack the Ripper. But what happened, by the way, Neil Story sends his best.
Oh, good. Yes, I know Neil.
Yeah, he did the foreword of my last book. And then, but one of the things I discovered in 2013, I think it would be right down your alley, across the street from the Whitechapel, the hospital, London Hospital, was a Whitechapel's Chamber of Horrors wax museum on the first floor. And then the basement floor, every time a Ripper victim was murdered, they did a wax display of them, and they had upwards, of the wax in the basement floor, and it was a very crowded museum all the time. And so one of my books is called Ripper's Haunts, because I figured that Jack the Ripper haunted there. So I was thinking that that Chamber of Horrors wax museum kind of would be very kind of horror-like during that stuff.
Yeah, I thought, what's interesting about murder, and I've written some crime stuff as well, murder is almost the most intimate thing you can do. It's not sex. Murder is actually the most intimate thing you can do. And I think that's why we have that fascination. And if the Ripper murders, captivate people because of the whispers of the occult within them, the conspiracy theories that have come out through like Stephen Knight's books.
Oh, yeah.
All of that stuff. And the Ripper is seen as almost the sigil for Victorian London, which I find absolutely fascinating. I mean, the start of my book, it doesn't focus on murders as such, it focuses on what was going on in society, and actually is quite positive. We're looking at characters like, Florence Nightingale and Thomas Bernardo and, Josephine Butler, who championed women's rights. And so, because I didn't want to immerse the reader straight away into, there's all this death and it's horrible and it was terrible. But with all of this progress, then you'd have how people lived their lives and They were almost like battery hens, and in the midst of this, then you did have the grotesque. You did have the, the Jack the Rippers and all of those kind of things. And, I think that's, it's right. It's a counterpoint, you know?
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a social reformer back then. You know, that kind of certainly put the eyes on the poor East End.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most interesting characters I've written about is Mary Ann Cotton, who, she's one of the most notorious female serial killers. And, her tale's it's quite a dark and twisted narrative of like poison and deception and murder and all sorts of things. But her background, she was intimately familiar with the harsh realities of life in mid-19th century England. And for a lot of murderers, a lot of serial killers in the Victorian era, they did grow up with that sort of deprivation. And I'm not sure if that's a reason or it was just, it might have been part of the makeup for, to create or to craft these murders. I'm not sure, but it's a common point.
Well, it's still a common point with serial killers today. I mean, there's like that serial killer trifecta of like most serial killers come from, underprivileged, really hard childhoods, have early head trauma. There's all of these things that like they all check off these boxes.
Yeah.
And what are you trying to say, Al?
Are you confessing to something?
No, not at all. It's my day job.
We all have a day job. Somebody's got to be a serial killer.
My side hustle. Well, what is this book? So, Shadows by Gaslight. Let's talk about the title. Where did that come from? And tell us the premise of what you've written here.
Where did that come from? I'm very bad with titles. Here's a big confession. It took me a while. It was like we kicked around. I like the evocative image of the person lighting the gas lamps, and that fog, and all of the tropes. Right? I've always loved that. I had a memory of the Sherlock Holmes Granada TV Sherlock Holmes series with the late lamented Jeremy Brett. I grew up with Jeremy Brett as being my Holmes, and I remember some of the scenes with the gas lights being lit, and I just love that the whole eerie, shadowy sense of Victorian London. I thought it would be a good title, right? So that's where it came from. And the book is all about, it's a general book just about the Victorian crime. I've got 20 sort of notorious serial killers in there, all various grotesque things happened, baby farming, all sorts of things like that. But also, how Victorian, crime influenced popular literature, the Penny Dreadfuls, Poe's Gibbon, Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, and the birth of Scotland Yard, the birth of forensics. Beware your sins will find you out has a completely new meaning whenever we start looking at forensics and the birth of forensics. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what the book sort of encapsulates.
Must have been a lot of research.
Yeah, it was about 2.5 months of lots of books, lots of library trips. I'd done some of this research with the Dracula stuff. So, I had researched the insane asylums, crime. A lot of people don't know that Bram Stoker had intended Dracula to actually be a crime novel, with a vampire in it. But there were, characters that were removed, Decker and I've put back in using Stokerverse. So there was an Inspector Cotford that Bram Stoker wrote about, and he investigated Lucy's death. So it's actually Dracula was meant to be a form of like detective story. So I'd done some of this research, before, but, I delved a little bit deeper for this book into like gender and crime, gender identity and crime, and there, I found that there was a sort of a complex interplay between the gender roles, societal expectations, and the narratives that surround, Victorian crime. So things like that I hadn't delved into too deeply, before. I didn't, the characters almost influenced, like, I think it was Raffles, was a guy called Charles Peace, who captivated audiences with his daring heists, and he was almost a hero of Victorian society because of his audacity and his heists and stuff like that. Knew nothing about that. Knew very little about Victorian era prisons. So there was a lot of study and a lot of, I found out an awful lot about our past, through it.
Do you think that any of the research that you've done for this book, do you think any of that's going to flavor your fictional work coming up? Are we going to see some of these real-life characters fictionalized by you?
Yes. I'm very keen. I mean, when I wrote the Stroke-Reverse RPG, I was very keen to put in real-life criminal gangs like the Elephant Gang and the High Rip gang that came down from Liverpool. I did bring those into the Stroke-Reverse RPG. I think for historical horror fiction to really resonate, if you put in the real life characters, skew them slightly, change them slightly, to fit the fictional narrative, but it does make the stories resonant, and certainly more powerful.
I was going to say that you really have to explain in the book as well some of the society, the Victorian society, and what was going on, what's expected. You were talking about that a little bit. So, because you mentioned baby farming, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a great name for a band. I'm just going to say.
Yeah, but a lot of the way crimes were or murders were for back then would have also been relative to what was going on in society and how people were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot of reform efforts as well, and feminist responses to the criminality in Victorian London especially. And I think the challenging of social norms and striving for systematic change within prisons, that's extremely powerful. And I try and bring that out later in the book, because I didn't want to dwell solely on here's a list of grotesque individuals and what they've done. I also wanted to say, here's what actually, due to criminality, due to, the penny dreadfuls in the newspapers, it was the newspaper owners, they loved all the grotesque murders, and so they made sure they were publicised to sell the papers. But that started a chain reaction where, great individuals like Josephine Butler and there was activists like Barbara Leigh Smith and Emily Davis, and they were instrumental in the campaign for women's suffrage and access to education, because they believed, quite rightly, that a lot of this crime was due to desperation. So I wanted to bring that out as well in the book.
Did you happen to use any like Burke and Hare, like body snatching, any of that stuff?
No, actually, I stayed away from that.
Okay.
I didn't use that. I used it mostly sort of like there's different categories like poisoners, like stranglers,
right.
People who like to chop heads off and boil people in large pots and then sell their fat as dripping. All of that sort of stuff, because that to me was quite shocking, really. But it was the boiling of the victim's body in pots was quite common.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You should have dinner at my place.
Chianti sauce?
Yeah.
Chianti and fava beans, right?
Chris, do you have, this is going to sound like a weird question, but do you have a favorite type of murderer? I mean, because, I love a good poisoner. Those are always, the things that fascinate me the most. Did you develop a new favorite, or?
I'll segue into something about poisoner. Russell T Davies, the showrunner for Doctor Who, loves poisonings. He told me this. In most of his work, there's a poison happens. He did a series with Christopher Eccleston. I think it may have been called Messiah, and it was about a guy who was an incarnation of Jesus Christ to get digital downloads from God. And then the last great revelation was that mankind didn't need a God anymore. So what happened was his wife basically serves him poison and kills him. But that's RTD loves a good poison, and he's actually put it in Doctor Who many times. I think for me, it's that intimate nature. It's the, maybe stabbings. Because with a stabbing, and I mean, this does sound quite grotesque, but with a stabbing, you have to get in quite close. And maybe it takes a couple of times, but you're using your hand. You're
Personal.
It's very, very personal. And usually when you have a stabbing like that, there is a very powerful backstory. So from a narrative perspective, something like that is quite powerful. You know, guns and using implements that are far away, usually it's quite cold, and there's a money motive. But with a stabbing, it's either opportunistic or it's personal.
Yeah, with Jack the Ripper, he did actually strangle first and then stab. Well, that Martha Tabram was stabbed 39 times. So.
Yeah.
And yeah, there is something about that, because you look at, not getting even today with the guns and the amount that it's so easy to shoot someone, right? There's less intimacy. It's not personal. You don't feel it, I think, the same way as when you stab someone.
And the choice of the knife, if it's ornate, if there's carvings, it's another interesting facet about murder as well.
But they weren't very good at policing that sort of thing in this time period that you've written in, right? Like they couldn't look at the knives and the wounds and tell a whole lot about it, or could they? Where were they then?
It was very much the start of forensic medical science. I mean, he did do like fingerprint analysis. I think it was it was I think it was something like 1902. There was a guy who stole a set of billiard balls. His name was Harry Jackson, and he was convicted on fingerprint evidence. Now that wasn't in the Victorian era in the world. That wasn't the first person it wasn't the first person in the world who was convicted. It was actually a woman called Francisca Rojas, who killed two of her children in Argentina. She was the first in the world to be convicted using fingerprint analysis. But Harry Jackson was the first man in the UK to be convicted. You did have a level of profiling, and that was Jack the Ripper. Really, that case started police creating the first sort of criminal profile in order to understand, this new breed of monster in the Victorian era. There was a Dr. Thomas Bond, who was a surgeon with the Met Police, and he was the first person to profile a criminal. Right. And I think he said that Jack the Ripper was somebody who was subject to erotic mania.
Yeah. Right, he did, and that was right after the Mary Kelly murder. And he did the postmortem with the Mary Kelly, and then by extension, then he thought, the difference is that back then, he believed that the act of mutilation was his motive. But what happens is nowadays, when we look at any serial killers that, take organs, if mutilation might be part of the motive, but there's multiple motives, and that's so you could see the beginning of his forensic, profiling, they just needed a little more step to it, so he was on the right track. Yeah,
I do. I remember he thought that the Ripper was an inoffensive looking man as well, somebody who could easily slip into. I've written Jack the Ripper for Dracula, for the Bram Stoker stuff, and
right.
My Jack the Ripper is based on Walter Sickert, and he's a painter. So I follow the Patricia Cornwell view of the Ripper, just because I like the idea of having a backstory as a painter. I like the idea of the murders were displayed like a tableau, a bit like the Monster of Florence, the way the Monster of Florence did. But yeah, no, and then you had like microscopic analysis. They were looking at hairs and fibers in crime scenes, and that started in, I think, the 1860s. So there was forensic analysis that was used, including like ballistic, analysis, and you had autopsies, toxicologies, blood analysis, and then, little bits and pieces of crime, photography. I think it was Mary Kelly. You'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mike, but I think it was Mary Kelly who was the first, who's one of the first photos of a victim that was shown through crime scene photography.
Yeah, through crime scenes photography, yeah. Then, so although a couple of them were photos of them when they were in the morgue prior to that, Elizabeth Stride, but yeah.
So, and one of the most interesting parts is that the police believed that there'd be a lasting image of a killer preserved on the retina of the victim.
Yes.
And that's interesting as well, because there's a little bit of occult science in that, right? There's a little bit of that that's still going on. So there was rudimentary attempts, and it definitely, I bring out in the book about obviously a lot of negatives with this violent crime, but also, society realized that there had to be an answer to it. There had to be something happen. There had to be a way to protect people, or at least bring the criminals to justice.
Were they good at detecting the type of poison that Jennifer was using on her victims?
Most poisoners are women, so maybe that is probably part
Which
of
is
my
true,
calculation,
yes.
too.
Yeah. No, that's why I was asking, because we know that's her favor. No, but were they able to tell, like, when someone died of some sort of poisoning, or if they died of just something that happened with the body normally? Like, were they good at determining, or could they tell?
Yeah, I think there was, there's accidental poisoning, and, later in the Victorian era, they knew about that. They were able to detect, there was one case where somebody was, fed chloroform, and what happened was the poor man started, his teeth, he started having terrible breath, and his teeth were falling out, and all the rest of it, and his wife was feeding him chloroform. She was having an affair with the local vicar, and the two conspired to kill him. And they knew that there was chloroform in his stomach. They were able to tell that. But the Victorians kind of accidentally poisoned themselves with all sorts of things like carbolic acid. Strychnine in the beers, that usually is the one, that people point to. There was a small amount, but it was still in the beer. You had things like laudanum, which was kind of seen as a panacea. But yeah, very affordable, and people became addicted to it and killed them. So yeah, poisoning's an interesting one. Even the gas lamps, I think, were poisoning people because there was a cocktail of the hydrogen, the sulfur, the methane, and carbon monoxide. And there was somebody who poisoned their wife in that way, where they allowed the gas lights to leak and killed the poor woman that way. Yeah.
So, Chris, there was connected to, let's say, Dracula. There was an actual Scotland Yard actually investigated the theory that Jack the Ripper was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type person, and then during the day he was a prominent physician, and at night he's a medical maniac looking for the elixir of life. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting is because at the Lyceum Theater, when first of all, here it is, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was shown at the beginning of it, and then here's Bram Stoker's business agent or business manager of the Lyceum Theater. And the Order of the Golden Dawn, one of their goals was to look for the Philosopher's Stone, the elixir. And then here's the best friend of Bram Stoker's Sir Henry Alkane, who's the boyfriend of my guy I researched, Francis Tumbley, who was looking for the elixir. So it's like, this connection.
Yeah. Well, there was a common thing. There's a common thing with the occult, and it comes from alchemy. You have that, and the Order of the Golden Dawn was particularly interesting because you had the characters like Aleister Crowley and William Butler Yeats, and the two of them hated each other.
Yes.
But when it comes to Dracula, a lot of people again don't know this, but in one of the books that Bram Stoker sort of defaced in the London Library, when he was doing his research, he wrote Ripper ? And it is in Bram Stoker's handwriting. Dracula, definitely there was a level of influence there with and that's one of the reasons I put the Ripper into the Stokerverse with Deckard.
Okay.
in our, just to segue into Dracula, the Return issue 2, Dracula, the Return issue 2 looks at Sir Henry Irving as being the real life Dracula, as being the individual who influenced, the creation of Dracula, with Bram Stoker. Henry Irving was a Freemason, so was Bram Stoker. And we believe that Bram Stoker was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn. He certainly was involved with the tarot cards, with A. Waite's tarot cards. The lady who illustrated the tarot cards was the same lady who designed the backdrops for the Lyceum Theatre and also illustrated the cover of The Lair of the White Worm.
Oh, yes. So, question with Bram Stoker. He was Catholic. And I remember one of the things that the Catholic Church would banish you, basically, if you were part of any of the orders. So what I'd heard about Bram Stoker, and Neil Story talks more about this, is that he couldn't publicly say he was a member of the order, but boy, was he friends with every single one. He was always there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Bram Stoker was actually Church of Ireland. He was Anglican. He was baptized by Reverend Edmund Nugent, and Bram's theological Bram looked at the conflict in Ireland in a very different way. Bram looked for the truth, and he looked for the truth in many different areas. He wasn't dogmatically Protestant. And he looked for a sort of a third way between Catholicism and Protestantism. He was attracted to Freemasonry, I think, because Freemasonry offered a form of truth in allegory, veiled in allegory and symbolism. The Order of the Golden Dawn was it was held at the Master Mason Hall. It was, the leader of it was a prominent Freemason called MacGregor Maffers, and it was very linked to the rise in Egyptian spirituality within Victorian era. So within Freemasonry, you started to see orders like the Holy Royal Arch, which is actually an Irish order in Freemasonry, originally an Irish order, and they have the sarcophaguses and sphinxes and all sorts of little things like that. And instead of worshipful master, the person who would be in charge of the Holy Royal Arch orders would be High King, and it would be very Egyptian. They would be dressed as an Egyptian pharaoh. There was an explosion of that interest within Victorian culture, and I think that's where the Golden Dawn came in.
How interesting that 1891 is when Tumbledy's room was ransacked. He had money stolen, and they found this Egyptian little model in there.
Yes, so. And there's a lot of it. There's a lot of that Egyptian occultism that kind of pervaded through the Victorian era. And even like Bram Stoker wrote Jewel of Seven Stars, and Jewel of Seven Stars is a story about a very powerful queen of Egypt who's also a sorceress. Her name was Terra, and it's about an archaeologist who takes his daughter and a couple others, and the daughter gets possessed by the sorceress. And it's cosmic horror. It's very much in the blend and theme of cosmic horror, but it does point to the fascination that the Victorians had with the Egyptology and the occult.
A lot of cool stories.
So what do you hope people get out of this book? Is this pure entertainment for people?
Partly everything I write is kind of entertainment. If a book's not entertaining, people aren't going to read it. I would like people, at the end of it, because obviously it's a book based on fact, I want people to come away with that was pretty cool, or, wow, I didn't know that happened. To come away with a greater knowledge of where some of our, Victorian literary greats, the great detectives, where they came from. And also to give a little bit of thanks to the pioneers of forensics in the Victorian era. Like I say, my book's I try for it not to be depressing. Yes, it's got all the gory details in there, but it's also society's response to that, and there was a lot of shock with it, although, there's always macabre interest in murder. There was a lot of shock to it. I mean, there was a lot of empathy as well, like, and fear, but, there was empathy there with, a fellow human being murdered either in tragic or horrific circumstances. And I think we all have that. I mean, I would sit and watch some of the true crime stuff on YouTube, some of the great YouTube channels, and I read true crime books. And even though, you can be, and I don't even know if entertain's the right word for it, but we're always shocked and horrified by the capability of humans to do the kind of acts that we read about or we watch. I mean, in the book, there's aspects of, I think, desperation from people and why they do what they do. Moments of anger. Sometimes it's very calculated, but there are times whenever I was researching some of these murders, there's a form of understanding. I wouldn't say empathy, but a form of understanding for why certain people did what they did. And we're all capable of it. We're all capable of it.
Well, and I think that's important too. It's really finding the understanding, right? Trying to put yourself in the place of knowing why someone did what they did, like what was going through their mind, what was happening. Yeah,
and I tried to go into that. I tried to go into the, I'm not qualified psychoanalyst, but I tried to delve into that a little bit. The mindset, and some of the cases were particularly sad, and and that's it was almost whenever I was researching stories and I was writing about them. You're writing about the entirety of the human process. People who fall in love, people who fall out of love, revenge, anger, betrayal, jealousy, greed. It's all there in the annals of Victorian crime.
Is there beer drinking or is it just gin?
Oh, there's a little beer drinking in there, yeah. There was a little, look, I think.
What were the pubs like, Chris? This is what we're asking.
Well, I've been in a few Victorian era pubs. There's one that I love dearly in Belfast called The Crown, and it's a Victorian gin house, but it served beer, and they've kept the decor exactly the way it was. They've got the gas lamps, they've got little snugs, you've got little bells that you can ring for attention in your snug. Huh. I love going to the old pubs back home and seeing how one of the fascinating things about pub culture in Ireland is that men and women were separated until the 1960s in various eras of pub. Yeah, absolutely. But this wasn't and it wasn't really enforced. This is another interesting thing. Women naturally went off into their snug, and it was almost like a different bar, and they were served their gins and they were served their wines or whatever, while the men were sort of left to chat about all sorts of things and maybe tell a few dirty jokes in the regular bar. It was kind of it was kind of chosen, if that makes sense. It was kind of a sort of a thing. And then that all stopped in the 60s. It was just, we'll just have one pub and that's it.
We still have some in Canada like that.
Really?
Well, they don't enforce it, but they've kept some of the old ones in Vancouver. You still see them where, woman's entrance.
Oh, okay.
Men's entrance, and they have them separate and all that stuff, and they've kept it because you go downtown Vancouver and some of the old cabaret bars, whatever they called them back then.
Yeah.
They're updated. They're just a pub when you go inside, but they kept the outside because it's pretty interesting. I love that.
Well, you've now started my interest that I might actually write a book on the history of famous pubs.
You'll have to do so much research.
Oh. No, the research, Jennifer, would be incredible. Could you imagine that?
If you need a research assistant to...
Yes.
I feel like...
Yeah, because there's only so many beers in a day and so many places a day that a person can actually visit.
Yeah.
Right. Just
we can help you.
Yeah, I'm wondering now. Here's a call to any publisher who'd be interested in funding this very important piece of historical literature. Contact myself, Jennifer, Alan, and Mike, and we'd be more than interested.
That's right.
You can take the show on the road.
Yeah.
Have some mystery
we'll do
live. Yeah. Live and drunk from a Victorian pub.
Yeah.
I'm going to San Francisco for the first time ever on Sunday.
Oh.
I'm actually quite excited about it. It's the first time ever. I've never been.
Oh,
But yeah, I'm going for a video game conference, but I'm going to visit Chinatown.
It's beautiful.
So,
It's beautiful.
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all the history there, and
Yeah, I
I'm
go
looking forward to
every
going
year.
there.
Oh, and that's neat.
yeah. It's pretty nice. It's a pretty good city. Good city.
Didn't they kidnap people in the old days and take them and Shanghai them in San Francisco?
Well, they still do.
Yeah, I think they still
Oh,
do
okay.
that. And for a while, San Francisco was the murder capital of the United States. Like, it had more
Oh.
serial killers. That whole San Francisco, that Bay
Yeah.
Area.
Well,
And pubs.
And pubs.
And pubs.
yeah, we'll just not tell my wife about the serial killer aspect.
No.
But
Wow.
we've got. Like, I'm landing on Paddy's Day. I'm landing on the 17th. So we've got a little pub down the street from the hotel I'm staying in. There's a little pub that we've scoped out that we might hole up in for a couple of hours.
So you won't really be
so-
landing. You'll just be.
Skipping along the runway still, probably. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. You know, I have a great love for New York. I've talked about this before. I have a great love for New York and New York's history and the people of New York.
Good.
So-
I'm from Buffalo, so there you go.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that after I leave San Francisco, I have to see him for folks in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So, Al, here we have, I want to have the interview for another 2 hours, but now I'm thirsty for a Guinness.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah. So Chris, what's your website? What's your contact info, social media for people, for listeners?
Well, yeah, I'm very open on Facebook. If you search for Chris McAuley on Facebook, you'll see me and a rather nice profile picture that a very talented photographer took. I don't really look like that in real life.
Oh, darn, Chris. I just friended you today, and I was really hoping that was real.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's real enough, but I think it took an hour to get to that stage. Yeah, certainly hit me up on Facebook. Snookerverse, obviously, www.snookerverse.com. For the science fiction stuff, if you're interested in Terminator, Star Trek, Doctor Who, Dark Legacies, it's www.dark-universes.com. Generally, if you Google me, you'll get something about me. Most of it's true.
Yeah.
And, you'll find me somewhere. But if anybody's interested in my work, yeah, just reach out and I'll point them in the direction of where to find anything more.
Now, Jennifer's fear is Doctor Who, so watch
Well,
out.
one of my many strange fears is Doctor Who.
Really?
Yeah, and I was talking before the show, I've never seen any contemporary Doctor Who. I saw maybe a couple episodes of the old 1960s, 1970s Doctor Who when I was a kid.
Okay.
Scared the hell out of me. And it's just, I've just had that as part of one of my core memories ever since then. And
I've written a Cyberman story, and Cybermen always. I'm fascinated. I'm actually doing here's an exclusive. I'm working on a Neuromancer title at the minute. I'm not allowed to say anything more about that, but I'm working on it. I love cyberpunk. I love the whole thing about cyberpunk. I don't like cyberpunk as in the sexy chrome slick exterior. I like cyberpunk as in the sort of HR Giger style of, when you wear the stuff that hurts.
yeah.
But the Cybermen are born from fear. The Cybermen are born from the fear of aging, the fear of death. So they turn to technology. And the Cybermen I write about are the early Cybermen. So people have started to trade body parts for cyber parts, and, there's tubes that go from their insides to a backpack, that recycle bodily fluids. Tubes coming out of their mouth, the partially cybernized, but with little scraps of meat left. And if you look at the Cybermen's helmet, you see the little holes for the eyes. There's two holes. There's a large hole and there's a small hole. And what I said to Russell T. Davis about Cybermen were that those were the teardrops, the last moments of the soul finally leaving the human's shell as, people become fully cybernized. So the two small holes represent.
Well, there you go. I don't know what to say, but we appreciate you being on the show, and the book and your website. Everything will be up on our website as well, so people can find you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
It was awesome speaking with you, Chris.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me? Yeah. Good night. This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.